again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not.
Good afternoon. Welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. Delighted to say Ben is back. How are you, Ben?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, great to see you, mate. And I know we chatted a couple of weeks ago and we said we'd get you on to have a chat about transfers throughout the window. So a good opportunity has arisen today to get you on. And we put out a little tweet earlier on asking people if they wanted to leave questions. And by God, I think the first question we could be on all hour, the first hour about this. It is his opinion on fixing the fixture list for the Big Six to give them an easy game before the World Cup. What precedent it sets and how it impacts the integrity of the game. Also, if he thinks NUFC will be given the same amount of rope as Everton in regards to financial fair play. That was from Hoost NU.
Yeah, two questions there and really good ones as well. So for anyone wanting anything else, we probably ought to pick it up again about 5 o'clock because they're both kind of complicated. I mean, the short answer to the first question is that it is clearly unfair giving preferential treatment to the Big Six, if you are to term it that way, if you are to say that after squads are selected, the ones that have the highest volumes of international players will not come up against each other. That's arguably a little bit different, but it's not the Premier League's responsibility to give any international team outside, you would argue, of England or the home nations any kind of unfair advantage. So it's a silly notion that the bigger sides with more internationals, and that's why the request comes in, don't want to risk coming up against each other and having a sort of full-blooded encounter and picking up an injury before the World Cup. But who's to say that the lion's share of the England squad, which is really all the Premier League should be caring about, is going to come from a particular club within the Big Six? Statistically, the vast majority will come from cumulatively the Big Six. But I think we come back to the fundamental point that the Premier League cannot run as a 6 rather than a 20. And each of the 20, whether they're newly promoted, long-standing, big money, new money, foreign money, should have equal say and equal rights, including Newcastle United. And the secondary point is that if a World Cup is to function over the winter rather than the summer, then the Premier League anyway has to structure itself where its in point before the World Cup and its out point after the World Cup are in a doable way that is not going to risk more injuries or provide fatigue. And if that's not feasible, they have to start earlier or finish later or find a way around it. Or they could have ultimately protested a Winter World Cup in the first place. But to get to this point where we are days, let's say, before the World Cup break, and suddenly each of the Big Six will head into that period, one, not playing each other, and two, with a more preferential fixture as a result, is ridiculous. And it all comes down to why. Because I don't actually think it benefits the Big Six to not play each other the week before a World Cup if we're only looking at Liverpool against Manchester City. How is that a factor? Maybe those clubs would argue that they have one eye on the World Cup. But the flip side to that is, because it's still early in the season, who's to say that one of the Big Six clubs against another Big Six club that early in the season wouldn't chop and change or rotate, or it might be an opportunity for the away side to get a result because one or two players have got their eye on a World Cup. So I don't think that them not playing each other actually has a benefit domestically, but naturally the benefit, in my opinion, lies in the fact that these internationals then are less likely to be involved in high intensity games where they may pick up an injury. And of course, the implication is that if instead of Liverpool, Manchester City, it's Liverpool against Nottingham Forest, somehow Liverpool will be able to play some of their players not involved in the World Cup and still get a result. So I don't agree with it, and I don't think it should have anything or does have anything to do with the Big Six as a block or any kind of power grab domestically. It's all with a view to the World Cup. And the Premier League shouldn't be making decisions based on the World Cup broadly, only based upon benefiting the England national team. So unless Gareth Southgate's come out and said it's his personal request, I think that they should do away with it and the fixtures should continue to be generated randomly.
Yeah, great answer. And you managed to keep that quite short, Ben. So we have got time for other questions, which is great.
That was the second part of that, though, right?
Yeah, the other part was about Everton, but I'm not sure what is that going to be quite as long as the first one? I don't think so. He says also he thinks NUFC will be given the same amount of rope as Everton in regards to financial fair play.
Well, I think the question is not about rope and Everton; it's about creative accounting and Everton. So they've not been given any more leeway, which means that Newcastle won't. They've just been given the ability to benefit from how the COVID adjustment figures allow you to offset certain outgoings. So in essence, whereas every club has declared their COVID-related losses at X, which is a small number, Everton's declaration is Y, which is much, much larger. And the Premier League have looked at those outgoings and they've said, that's fine. It falls within profit and sustainability. And as a result, you're within the guidelines to the point where you won't be investigated, fined, dock points, and so on. Now, the precedent that Everton set isn't about leeway regarding the Premier League. Any club can do that. So let's say Newcastle want to overspend and then they realise they're in danger of the profit and sustainability, which for those that are unaware is the Premier League's version of financial fair play. The precedent Everton sets will allow clubs to opportunistically use it as an example and say, well, if their outgoings were that high, we want our COVID adjusted figures to be that high as well, that we can offset. So we're not talking about losses here generally. We're talking about you've got all of your losses, and then there is a percentage of those losses that you can offset under the new COVID adjusted rules. And the question mark over Everton's creative accounting is, why is every other club in the Premier League's numbers smaller than Everton during COVID when coincidentally they've got financial woes? And the answer is because they can creatively account in a way that allows them not to be fined or dock points or punished or further investigated. And for whatever reason, without much transparency at the moment, the Premier League have taken those numbers and nothing has come of it. So technically, other clubs could do the same, but it would perhaps, in Newcastle's case and other clubs, provoke an investigation because they will have jumped from COVID losses that they are offsetting that are much smaller to much larger. So Everton's advantage is the fact that they've declared a big number from the word go. So now if their losses stay at that level, it's consistent. And if they drop, it's an improvement. But obviously if Newcastle suddenly spend 250 million and then their COVID adjusted losses go from a small number to a large number, at that point, the Premier League may say, well, why the increase? And Newcastle may not have an explanation other than the fact that they wanted to spend a lot of money in the transfer window and find a way under PNS of offsetting that.
Yeah, okay, good stuff, good answers. Keep your questions coming in. We will go through the ones on Twitter. There's only about 5 or 6. We'll do the chat questions in the second half of the show. Basically, this question, there's a couple of people asking questions about Ekitike and Botman. So we'll go with Thomas's question on Twitter. He says, are there any physical meetings planned that you know of between the clubs and the agents? And I'll add this question from Tom in the chat, asking whether you feel that the injury that Ekitike suffered, playing for the French team, is likely to affect the potential of the deal.
I don't think the injury will be a massive factor, but hamstring injuries affect medicals, for example, and it can certainly slow the process a little bit, but we're still early in the window. Newcastle sources have made no secret of the fact that Ekitike is a player that they've been tracking for a while, but the club are also looking at alternatives as well, which very much tells you the state of play. And Botman falls into a similar category, but the deal is much more advanced and it's shaping up to be a straight choice between either Milan or Newcastle United. Don't read too much into the PSG interest, because the sources at PSG are very much dismissing that he's a target. And as you'll find with Dembele as well, who wants a move to PSG, even though Chelsea's looking increasingly more likely. They had one strategy under Leonardo, but now they're reassessing under Campos. And that's not only going to mean that they might U-turn on some targets, but they could be a little bit slower in the market. So with Ekitike, there is an agreement over the striker. The value will be something just shy of 30 million, but the deal is not done at this point, and there's still some persuasion needed to get him to Newcastle United, and the hamstring injury will only slow things down. And the other thing with Ekitike as well is just that there are plenty of other clubs looking into him all across Europe because of the age and the talent and the value. 25 to 30 million, something in that ballpark, is a lot of money for a 19-year-old, but all you need is 1 or 2 explosive seasons, and then suddenly you're an early 20-year-old who's worth double that price. And therein lies some of the value. I think Newcastle remain confident that they are the front runners in this deal, but they're well aware, glancing over their shoulder, that there is other interest coming, particularly from Europe. And when I spoke to people close to Ekitike, I was told that Ajax are looking, that Bayern have scouted in the past, that 2 other Premier League clubs who were unnamed to me have also been tracking him since January. So I don't think Ekitike is a done deal, and the injury plus the persuasion of the player mean that any kind of basic agreement in place doesn't advance things to the point where that is as imminent as perhaps Botman. And then with Botman, it's a case of which camp, if you like, you believe, because the Newcastle United side remain very confident of getting the deal done. The Milan team are more confident now than they were in January. Some at Newcastle say that it should be quite quick now because they did all the legwork in January, and yet they've had to go back and forwards 3 times already in negotiations only this summer, which tells you that not much can have actually been in place in January as far as the finances are concerned. And Botman isn't delaying per se. Those, again, close to the Milan side are arguing that Maldini, the technical director, made a very strong pitch and has persuaded him that Milan is for him. And he's also quite friendly with another player, Simon Kjær, who has told him all about the club and the culture and the fan base and so on. But let's not forget, this was the same player that went on Instagram and liked a mocked up photo of him in January dressed in a Newcastle United shirt, and is on record as saying that it looks like a really exciting project. And if he can enter at ground level, then it could turn into something like the City Group. And that was spoken at the time when Newcastle United were in the relegation zone in January and fighting for their lives. And the club is much healthier now. And he'll have seen that over the last 6 months. And he'll also have noted the full attendances and the fan base and the culture and so on. So for me with Botman, it's just a normal case of a player early on in the window, knowing he's got options, waiting and seeing, first of all, whether Lille and Milan get a deal because there's financial negotiation. Newcastle, on the other hand, have now thrashed out a financial package, but they won't table any form of official or paper bid until they get to the point where Botman makes up his mind, because they're wasting their time. Botman's agent says that nothing will be imminent, i.e. in the next 4 or 5 days. He's going to wait and see what happens with Milan first. That's probably going to take a week. And then from that point, he'll make his decision. And then the process, if he picks Newcastle, would start. So I think if Newcastle's confidence is correct, they would be hopeful of getting the Botman deal completed before the end of the month. But it's certainly not a transfer that I expect to be days away. We're looking at weeks.
Yeah, okay, interesting. It's very much a case of stay calm. That's the message I'm trying to give to Newcastle fans. You know, the window's only just opened. We don't need to panic. You know, we've already got, you know, Target in, which is a good signing, but just don't panic. Give it time. That, you know, we've got Dan Ashworth in, which I still think will be the, you know, the best signing of the summer. Soda Pop, he asks, any rumours at your end, Ben, Leicester, about Maddison coming to Newcastle?
No, Maddison won't be sold by Leicester, and an astronomical offer is the only thing that could potentially change that. Brendan Rodgers is going to be backed by an ownership group that are notorious, really, for hanging on to star names, regardless of contracts running down. Mahrez is a good example of that. I know he eventually went to Manchester City, but some Newcastle fans might remember in the window before he left the Algeria national team saying that a transfer was happening and it looked like Chelsea, and Leicester just said, no, we're hanging on to you. And from Leicester's point of view, it's quite a thin squad anyway at the moment. And there might surprisingly be an offer that comes in for Fofana, even though he only signed a contract extension in March. And it looks like Tielemans is going to leave as well, almost certainly, with Arsenal, the strong front runners there, in a late hijack bid from Tottenham. By the way, I think there's a few Newcastle fans that would quite like Tielemans, but it's interesting that the Tielemans brigade have quieted because Joe Linton found form and Bruno's been so amazing that you're quite well stocked in that sort of central midfield position now. But I just sense from Leicester's point of view that given the age of Vardy, and they know they need to find a new striker, given the fact that Schmeichel might be replaced, and then when you factor in Fofana could be the one for the right offer that Leicester sell for a big price, coupled with Tielemans' almost certain departure this window, and then to allow Maddison to leave as well would not be a financial necessity for Leicester and would break up too much of the spine of the squad that Brendan Rodgers is building. So I think Leicester are pretty intent on just hanging on to him this summer.
Okay, great player if Newcastle could get it, but again, I think that's out of our ballpark at this moment in time. I think later on, a couple of years down the road, if Newcastle can achieve stability in the Premier League and knocking on the door of Europe, then we may well be able to bring in those kind of players. Thomas asks, if you were to guess a wild card transfer to Newcastle this summer, who would it be?
Yeah, it's a great question. The wild card for me won't now happen. I'm going to give you a few names, but Darwin Núñez was the sort of back pocket one, and it was obvious that Newcastle were interested, and quite seriously as well, in the sense they tracked him, they contacted the agent, and it became apparent that Newcastle didn't see value in the price that Benfica were originally quoting, and Liverpool and Manchester United went ahead in the race, and then there onwards Newcastle were never serious contenders, certainly not in the last month or so. Their interest, I think, waned, but he would have been a great signing for Newcastle, and somebody that I think would have underlined the ambition of the football club. In terms of other names, Tammy Abraham is one that I think would be a brilliant signing for Newcastle. The striker position needs strengthening. Chris Wood, not a long-term solution. Callum Wilson in his 30s. And then there's a range of sort of goal scorers behind that are very versatile, but who's that out-and-out striker? And Tammy Abraham, hugely in demand. No guarantees even that he's going to leave Roma. I remember going over to Roma and talking to Abraham and also Mourinho maybe 4 months ago. And Abraham made it clear how happy he was with the culture. He enjoyed the climate, the lack of media glare. Yet he's done so well, it looks like a return to the Premier League. And why not Newcastle United? But there's no evidence that they are actively chasing him. And the same can be said for Gabriel Jesus as well. Another great signing for a club like Newcastle, somebody that is a focal point with proven Premier League goal scoring experience, but just not a player they've gone for. So I suppose then if we're looking at wildcard strikers or forward players, the name that keeps coming up is Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Newcastle seemingly will come back in for him if Ekitike doesn't come off. And the question mark there, I think, is not about talent, but mentality. And Newcastle at the moment are all about fits. So it's all very well throwing these names out like a Bale speculatively or a Calvert-Lewin because he's available in the market. Dembele is another one historically that's been linked with Newcastle, but again, no interest, no offer, nothing advanced there. Most likely destination is Chelsea. But these names aren't necessarily dressing room fits. And to Eddie Howe's credit, and I'm sure that Dan Ashworth will continue this, everyone that Newcastle have brought in so far is sensible rather than, for want of a better word, sexy. And a bit like me, in fact. And the thing with that approach is that it creates a mentality off the football field as well as on it. So Matt Targett, Kieran Trippier, Bruno, what have they all got in common? The fact that they are amenable to different systems, different training methods. They'll play in different styles. They can move to different sides. They've got passion and energy on and off the field. They engage in social media. They engage with the fan base. And Newcastle under Howe and definitely under Ashworth are starting to score these names on more than just their football ability, because they have to not only be sold on the culture of the club, but they have to live and breathe it on and off the field. And you definitely see that with Bruno, and that's why he's so popular with the fan base. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is risk reward. He could arrive at Newcastle United and be box office and love it so much that he becomes a cult figure. Or it could be an absolute disaster and he could be guilty of not tracking back. And when he goes through droughts, could look very disinterested and not enjoy playing under this high energy, attack-minded system. So that's the challenge, and Newcastle will have to weigh that up. But he's definitely a wild card. And of all the names I've mentioned up front, he's obviously the one that is actually actively on Newcastle's radar at the moment, especially, as I say, if Ekitike doesn't come off.
Yeah, okay. Plenty of food for thought there, and get your questions in the chat. We will, as I say, come to you in the second half of the show. Kenneth asks, do you think we've got a chance of getting Diaby?
I think absolutely. That's another name on Newcastle's radar. And fans should sort of understand that when I say radar, the way the window works is you don't just draw up a short list of players you want. You have backups and you have those that are offered to you, and Moussa Diaby falls into the category of a player that has been offered to them by Bayer Leverkusen, but the quoted price is sort of 37, 38 million, up to some say 41, 42. And that's a pretty hefty price to pay. Newcastle do need a winger. You'll probably have a stronger opinion on this than me, Steve. I've always seen Newcastle as needing to bring in goalkeeper, defender, striker, winger, and winger is important, but there are a lot of peripheral players that can play in that position at the football club, which for me makes it less urgent than, say, the goalkeeper and the striker position, or at least a backup goalkeeper and striker. So whether or not Newcastle are prepared to spend 40 odd million on Diaby is the big question. I wouldn't call it a priority. If you said to Eddie Howe, you're only going to get 3 players, I don't think that Diaby would be one of those 3, but it is certainly a possibility, and it's one to watch over the course of the window.
Yeah, plenty of things to watch with regards to the transfer window at Newcastle. It's going to be exciting, and at least we've got hope. I did a dinner with Paul Merson on Friday night, and interesting guy to meet, because obviously, as we all know, he's come out with some fairly critical stuff over the last few years about Newcastle, the supporters, and the ownership before the takeover. Then when the takeover went through, he is controversial, but I found him okay. This is what happens when you tend to meet people face to face. He felt that Newcastle supporters weren't delusional now, and he got the points that were made. I think the good thing about it, there was a good crowd there, and people were keen to come over, not have a go at him, and have a chat with him. And I think he's gone away with a message that we've just got our club back, we've got hope back, and he feels Newcastle would finishing 10th wouldn't be a bad call, and they're obviously going to hope for a run in the cups. And I just said that to him. I said that's it. That's all we really want. We're not expecting to win the Champions League. We're not expecting to be rivaling Liverpool and Manchester City to win the title. We've just got our club back, Ben. And that's ultimately all we ever wanted. You've always understood that. But I think sometimes it takes somebody like Paul Merson to come and sit with Newcastle fans and actually listen to what we've got to say to realise that we're not unrealistic.
No, not unrealistic at all. And obviously, you can't get from where Newcastle were last season in the second half of the season was better form-wise. It was European, but you can't jump from where the club was in terms of its behind the scenes and on the field structure to Champions League in a season. And if you do, you've had a fairy tale like Leicester did, but you'll drop back a bit after that. So Newcastle are looking to put a structure in place where they climb. And as you correctly say, if they climb from where they were at last season to 10th, 9th, 8th, and do well in a cup, that's a building block. And then from there, if fans see the improvement on the field the following season, they can start saying, why not Europa League or Europa Conference League? And then from there, in 3 years or 5 years, you find yourself breaking into the big six or the top six in the table, whichever way you want to term it. And that's a realistic expectation. Now, it might happen quicker than people suspect, but fundamentally, it's a fan base that want to just enjoy watching their football team. And whether they're playing Leicester at home in a mid-table mediocrity clash and annoyingly getting a last-minute winner, or a big game looking for the Champions League, it doesn't matter to the fan base who just live and breathe football. And that's burnt into the culture of the city. And when you have that extreme level of support for a football club that's so ingrained in the community, if the football club is left unloved and abandoned, then it reflects on the life of the fans, which is why it was so big to have a new ownership group in. And I think anyone that actually attends St James's Park understands that. So you can talk about the football club and how powerful it is to the everyday fan on a day-to-day level, regardless of whether they're mid-table, Champions League, Premier League. The fan base is simply looking to see that energy, that entertainment, that passion, that connection with the community, that connection between the ownership group and the fans. And that's what's being built at the moment. And if that continues into next season and they finish 10th, I agree with you. I think the vast majority of fans will be very happy with that. And why? Because they see the ambition, the strategy, and the potential. So under Mike Ashley, if Newcastle finished even 4th, but it was under Mike Ashley, then there still would have been a pessimism around, well, great, we're in the Champions League, but what's he going to do? Are we going to overspend? Are we going to rack up debt? Price is going to go up. Are we going to have any idea what the strategy is to build a big enough squad to cope with that? What's going to happen to season ticket prices? How are we going to integrate the women's team into the men's team and so on? And even though you'd have that short-term love for the football club because they did better, there's still no clue of what direction it's heading in. And now it's the opposite. If you finish 10th, but you feel like in 3 years, the club's building 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, and so on, you start to get excited and you start to be a bit more patient. And that, I think, is what's happening at the moment at Newcastle United Football Club.
Yeah, I'd agree, mate. 100%. It's all part of a big plan. I think that's what I love about it. And I think we've mentioned it before. Mitch has mentioned it on the Three Negos quite a bit. The Stockholm syndrome that Newcastle United fans suffer from, and I think I'm only just starting to relax now, Ben. You know, I can't help but think that 12 months ago, you know, if we were having this chat, we would be talking about Steve Bruce and, you know, would Mike Ashley give him anything to spend? And, you know, what the hell we're going to do with Joe Linton for the next season? You know, how bad was he going to be this season if he was bad last season? So I am in that mentality now where I'm just enjoying the positivity, enjoying the chat on the show every night, and just excited, mate. It's like Christmas Day. Every day as a Newcastle fan at the moment, and you just got to sit back and enjoy it. And I've been there before with the entertainers, but like I've said, you know, although it might sound a bit harsh on that entertainers era, this is now being built. You know, foundations are now being built for our football club on concrete, not on sand. And that makes a big difference, you know, and we don't have to worry about, you know, being outbid on things. We've just got to get ourselves into a position where we can offer European football, and then the big players will come. So it's exciting. It's great. Half an hour in. So as usual, we give our shout out to all of our sponsors. Huge thank you as always to Spider Miner, worldwide coverage from Nathan, Gareth and the lads. The only cryptocurrency miner that can mine 5 different cryptocurrencies at the same time while virtually no energy. And it's VPN protected, Buy yours now at www.minor.spidervpn.org. Thanks to Scott and the lads at skipsandbins.com. Telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Website www.skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to L&G Family Funeral Directors, 01913897245, and the Garden of Healing Dispensary, CBD Hemp and Cannabinoid Specialists, www.gohd.com. Thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables and walls in Newcastle, and to Cleek-Eye. Meet the new Game Over screen, drop into a Clearrun device near you. Available on Apple Store, Google Play, and clearrun.game. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. If you want to subscribe, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right-hand corner, and you can subscribe for free. We are still on 7 days a week through the close season. Hit the thumb up to like the video, click share to share to your social media, and drop into the comments box to speak to like-minded Newcastle fans or ask a question. We are also available as a podcast if you're out and about. iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest usually goes up 24 hours after the YouTube show has finished. Don't forget, you've got one more week to join us. What do I mean? Well, join the cult. Go to nufcmatters.com. If you pay your one-off fee of £25, you will get your cup, your scarf, your pen, your membership card, and you can also use the QR code to get there. But the most important announcement about this week is that if you join the cult this week, you will go into the monthly draw. And what are we giving away next weekend? We're giving away either a season ticket or the cash equivalent of £1,000. So well worth joining. You get your little freebies, but you've got a chance of winning a season ticket on Friday. So do not miss out. If you are a subscriber, we do send you a car sticker for free. You just need to email John at nufcmatters.com. And we still support the food bank. Very important that you help the food bank. NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk. The matchday bucket is virtual. Now, I had a little update on how much we'd given the food bank yesterday with John from QTech. And I've got to be honest, I was quite shocked. Right? I mean, the last time we checked, it was £30,000 that we'd raised for the food bank in 2 years. I'm going to have this verified by Steve, but I think we've hit the 70 grand mark now. And that is a massive achievement to everybody who supports the show, who comes on the platform, gives up the time for free, but also to everybody in the chat, the moderators. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. You know, we do this to try and make a difference. We do it obviously because we enjoy talking about Newcastle, but to be able to raise money for something as important as the food bank. I know we shouldn't have to rely on these things, but sadly some people do. But just want to thank everybody who supports the show, because we are making a difference by doing this. And they hit £70,000 in 2 years just from something that I tend to do from my kitchen on a night is great. So thank you everybody for your support. And don't forget, we are having a get together. Some of us are meeting next Friday for a night out, but the real end of season do is Friday the 24th of June, and that is at Shearer's Bar. Mick Lowes and Andy Griffin together. We had Andy on the show the other week. It was great to hear from him again. Tickets are £12 and £15 at Shearer's Bar. Don't miss out on that. It's going to be a cracking night. It's Andy's first talking as well, and we all know how good Mick is as well on asking the questions on those kinds of nights. So get yourself along and give it a bit of support. Okay, we are going to take your questions in the chat, and there was lots of them. Mad Mark says, Ben, have any of your PIF sources stated to you what the level of spending the club will do this summer now that the transfer window is open?
Well, I think that Newcastle had allocated somewhere between 100 to 150 million, and that's the sort of ballpark that has been budgeted for. But they're not just going to spend for the sake of spending. And having done some decent business in January, it will lessen the amount that Newcastle will look to spend over the summer. The club are confident that they can make that figure work within financial fair play and profit and sustainability. And I think that number's backed up by some of the players that Newcastle have looked at. So I said earlier that they were in for Darwin Núñez, and even though Newcastle didn't quite want to spend the 100 million euros all-in price that Benfica were asking for, to get Núñez, they will have known they were always going to have to pay a minimum, I would say, of 55 or 60 million up front, and Liverpool in the end paying a little bit higher than that to get that particular player. So then if you work on the premise that Newcastle will bring in a minimum of 3 and you're probably going to find one is a wide player, one is a striker, and one is a goalkeeper or a defender, and maybe all four will come in. I said earlier that if I was to pick three, I would say goalkeeper, defender, striker, but I'm sure there's fans out there that look at it more as winger, like a Nunes, out-and-out goal scorer. I mean, Nunes is an out-and-out goal scorer, so maybe he ticks both boxes, but not quite the same in terms of style or position as, say, a Gabriel Jesus or a Richarlison, for example. But if you sort of add up who's out there in the market and who Newcastle are looking at, they are essentially, even with bargains, going to have to spend 40 or 50 million on a marquee signing if some of the names linked with them at the moment materialize. And then the secondary names being looked at are still 20 to 30 million. And then a goalkeeper, even a backup goalkeeper, might cost you 4 to 10 million potentially, depending on whether they get in a flagship number one or somebody a little bit cheaper. And they could even loan and get around all of these outlays in one go. But there's not many ways of making a short list of, let's just say, three. If every fan went out there and picked three realistic targets in three key positions and added up the market value, it's coming probably to minimum 75 million and potentially 120, 130 million. And I don't think that that's any sweat to PIF, obviously in terms of their financial capability, but also financial fair play as well. I don't see Newcastle breaking the bank beyond 150 million. And I think if they spent 150 million, that would be deemed to almost be two windows. And you're going to see this a lot of clubs, perhaps a little fearful that there'll be less movement in January due to the fact it's the World Cup. And there's many players that perhaps would have gone in January that are wanting their future resolved now. So then everything can be in place come the World Cup. They can go off and play in a World Cup. And then when they come back, they're straight back into Premier League action. So it's a little bit unsettling to make a move in January. And you might see clubs move a little bit earlier and swiftly now to kind of get everything in place. But I think that PIF have always intimated that financial fair play at the moment, especially with COVID adjusted numbers, is not of huge concern. So I think if Newcastle really went out and tried to dominate, the maximum they'd spend is 150, but I think the number for me will be closer to 100.
Okay, good stuff. We'll see how they invest the money over the summer. John Askew says, Ben, do you think most fans prefer domestic leagues to the international stuff? And does the tail wag the dog in that domestic league seem to be subordinate?
I think fans prefer domestic leagues to international only because that's what they pay for and watch every day. That's their team. So it's natural that you're one Newcastle to England. And why wouldn't you be? Because one gives you the opportunity of daily and the other only comes around every 2 years as far as international competition is concerned. I think there's no real interest, is there, at the moment in the Nations League? England are playing woefully. And if anything, it's sort of after the Lord Mayor's parade, because we've had such a long season and it ended so dramatically at the top and the bottom. And then to be heading into the Nations League now feels overkill. And it's strange to say that because when there's no football, we all start saying, well, yikes, where's the football? But everyone, even fans, I think, has had football overload at the moment. And the COVID pandemic has knocked fixtures around even further. The TV schedules do the same. And we all arguably just want a little bit of a break, unless it's so intense or competitive that we can get invested into it. And that's why, by the way, that I hope that people, rather than moaning about internationals such as the Nations League, get excited now the window's open, the fixtures are coming out soon, but then turn their attention to whoever their country is for the Women's Euros, because I think that's going to be a fantastic spectacle. And that really is a tournament that we can get behind. And that will actually show that it isn't only about your domestic team, because I think that when you look at Newcastle United, the men's team specifically, most people on this podcast will put that above England. Perhaps not England in a semi-final or a final of a World Cup, but they'll have more of an affinity with Newcastle United, of course, because that's the team. And the reason for that, again, because of the previous point I made when you asked me about finishing 10th, is that it's not just a football club, it's a culture, it's an identity, it's intrinsically linked to everything about Newcastle. So it's your day-to-day, whereas England is about a country that you want to do well, but it's sort of not your day-to-day. It doesn't represent the same things that Newcastle do. You look everywhere on a Newcastle match day, from the food bank collections to the shirt that you put on, to players, to the people that sit next to you, to the food that you have, to the bar that you go into beforehand. And it all means something, different things to different people. Whereas for England, it feels like something that you cheer for, but your team's not playing at the same time. So I suppose when I look at it, I just say to myself, what if Leicester were playing Liverpool at the same time as England were playing Germany? Which one would I watch? And if they both had something at stake, it would be Leicester versus Liverpool. So club for me always trumps international. And then the second part about who's subordinate to who, I think it's difficult to tell, because the big five collectively in terms of the European leagues have still got the power, but Gianni Infantino and FIFA are desperately trying to have bigger World Cups and more regular World Cups, and then the balance may change a little bit. And I think that if we ever got into a worrying scenario where football became like rugby, and by that I mean that in rugby union, the domestic leagues continue whilst things like the Six Nations happen or Lions tours, and you get a club like my team, Leicester Tigers, who can dominate and then suddenly lose virtually all of their players and have a week, 8 weeks of the season where they have to just keep going. And then there becomes less interest and everyone starts watching the Six Nations over a Leicester Tigers game. And rugby has at times hit periods during the season where international has become bigger than club. Hopefully football won't get to that point. But of course, if we'd have had a Super League and with these Champions League reforms, and if we have more World Cups and or bigger World Cups and European Championships, there does become that danger that the best players have to make a choice, or the clubs have to make a choice as to how often they want to play their best players. And that's the only way that international football for me can really dominate, is if there's ever a scenario where players are forced to pick between the two, or players become, like in cricket, contracted to their national teams for set periods of the year. Because fans, especially ones that are global, tend to follow players these days rather than teams. So if Mbappe had moved to Real Madrid, you would have got a lot of people that were just Mbappe fans from all across the world that suddenly followed Real Madrid. We saw that with Ronaldo when he went to Juventus and then back to Manchester United and so on. So that's the sort of danger, is that if you ever get a friction between domestic and international, people will eventually follow players. And if those players choose their countries over their clubs, or are arrested by their clubs because of high demand for their country, at that point, you then get a growth of international football in terms of global interest at the expense of club football. But right now, I think nothing's going to beat club and Premier League football as far as international football is concerned. And long may that continue, because Premier League football and largely all 5 major European leagues are so competitive, intense, unpredictable, and they continue to grow and they continue to find ways to dominate despite new threats, new players, new formats, new competitions. And I just don't see the hardcore fan base, both domestic and global, moving away from that loyalty to their team in place of their country, unless the structure of football is altered to benefit international football. And like I say, I'm hopeful that that won't happen.
Okay, Roger says, question for Ben, who will finish higher, Newcastle or Leicester?
It's a good question. My heart obviously says Leicester, so I'll put that out there to begin with, but my head says Newcastle, honestly. And the reason for that is because Newcastle almost finished above Leicester even last season. There was sort of a maybe 6 or 7 games to go scenario where Newcastle were creeping towards Leicester's tally, and then Leicester actually finished the season relatively strong, and as a result were able to get quite respectable, more respectable than Leicester fans thought in, I would say, late March, when it looked like we might be bottom half and Newcastle were heading towards the top half. But Leicester don't have the spending power this window of Newcastle, and to get it, I think that we would have to sell a Fofana, or, as we talked about before, a Maddison. Tielemans going doesn't get you a great deal of money, probably only 25 million. So Leicester have been hit quite hard behind the scenes by COVID, had a bad season last season as far as injuries were concerned. So if everyone stays fit, Leicester are a top half team. If everyone stays fit at Newcastle, Newcastle are a top half team. And they're probably like for like in terms of talent and potential at the moment. I don't see either being anywhere near the top 4. Top 6, I think, is a push for both as well, but 7th to 10th. And if I was to slot both in, I think Newcastle and Leicester would be there. But the difference is that Newcastle will have more ambition and muscle this window, and will also be able to adjust and rectify if they need to in January. So if they find themselves in 7th, 6th or 5th in December, then they can continue to push in order to solidify that position. And Leicester are the opposite, that we've always had good windows. We've always found good untapped talent. We've had a young squad that sort of have complemented the experience of those that won the Premier League. But one thing that we've not really been able to do since, I would say, the season after we won the Premier League, and then the spending was bigger due to Champions League football, is adapt and adjust, financially speaking, mid-season. And you don't really see Leicester in the last 3 or 4 seasons have that many big Januaries. And as a consequence, and COVID has got something to do with this, as well as injuries and just bad luck, misfortune, whatever you want to call it, lack of experience, Leicester have had, not last season, but the previous 2 seasons, back-to-back seasons where they went into the final day of the season in Champions League football and failed to qualify. And that's had a big impact on the club. So Leicester, unfortunately, are moving backwards, not necessarily strategically. Brendan Rodgers is building for the long term, but they're falling away a little bit from where they were in those 2 seasons when they were top 4 and top 4. And now I think most Leicester fans would agree that Europe is a bonus, but we're really just looking to be a top half side. And Newcastle, on the other hand, have got the momentum of being in European form. So there won't be much between the two, but I think Newcastle will have a better home record at the end of the season than Leicester. And I can see Newcastle finishing 7th and Leicester being 9th. That is my prediction, with Wolves in between.
Okay, Ransom Real, I will answer your question. Our rivals are all the mid-table teams. I think Leicester, Aston Villa, Wolves, Southampton, anyone who's up in that kind of area. That's where Newcastle are at the moment, and depending on who they sign in the window will dictate where they finish in that particular race. It's not unfeasible, looking at the form at the back end of the season. That if they have a good selection and a good transfer window and then another good transfer window in January, who knows? Who knows? But it's very difficult to predict at the moment. But that's where I see us anyway, mate. So I hope that answer your question. Caretaker says Aston Villa will push Newcastle this season. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But it's just great not to be talking about relegation. And let's hope that's. Tell Ross mentioned it earlier in the chat. That would be a big achievement, just not being in a relegation battle this year. Manage the expectations. A lot of people asking about goalkeepers. Martin, he says, hi fellas, are we going to buy Dean Henderson? He's not being linked with any other goalkeepers. I did see somebody asking us earlier about Schmeichel. I know we've already asked you about that on this show. There it is, Barry Hogan asking about Schmeichel. He's better than Dubravka, a very commanding keeper. But I think the answer Ben gave us on the show the last time he was on was that Schmeichel wouldn't want to come in and sit on the bench. So I would say that was probably highly unlikely. So let's look at Dean Henderson. I mean, we've mentioned him on the show before, Ben. Have you heard anything about Newcastle making inroads into a goalkeeper?
Yeah, I mean, definite inroads into a goalkeeper. And that's the key question, really, strategically. And you get mixed reviews when you talk to people close to the football club. Are they going to use their flex to bring in a number 1? And then where does that leave Dubravka? Or do you persist with Dubravka, which seems to be the majority school of thought, and then you're looking at a number 2? When you're developing a number 2, do you get in somebody like Dean Henderson at 25 years of age, keep him at the football club, and find that he doesn't have as much game time? And is that what Henderson would want? But then do you sort of groom him in a season or two to come in his mid or late 20s to then assume the number one spot? And the challenge with Henderson is that's not what he wants, because since 2015, he's been out on loan everywhere, at Stockport, at Grimsby, at Shrewsbury, at Sheffield United. Yet he's won an England cap. He hasn't broken significantly into the Manchester United setup, even though I think in the Premier League in 2020-21, he played 13 times. So that was his one real opportunity to show what he could do at Manchester United. But I think that the challenge with Henderson, from what I understand, is that he may have been on the radar in January from the new ownership group, but not necessarily a priority specifically as far as Dan Ashworth is concerned. And I'm getting kind of increasing intel that Ashworth has other number two goalkeeper options in mind, or even really just equivalent to Dubravka, and then fight for the number one spot, which is an easier sell to a goalkeeper to say, well, we're not bringing you in only as a number two, we're bringing you in to challenge, and then it's up to Eddie Howe. And I think that the Swiss goalkeeper Jan Sommer falls into that category. 33, Borussia Mönchengladbach, who didn't have a great season, only finished 10th in the Bundesliga. And I am told that Ashworth prefers ramping up for Sommer over going for Henderson, and that is the current state of play, although those approaches or talks to Sommer specifically haven't advanced to any serious nature. But there's a long, long way to go in the window. And then with Schmeichel, I just don't see it. And he's in quite a difficult position, really, Kasper Schmeichel, because he is entering into his last, I would say, possibility of a full season at number one if he stays at Leicester. And in November, he'll turn 36. So unless he's prepared to drop down, he needs to find a club that within the Premier League would make him the number one. And when he was at Manchester City, he found himself very equal in every component to Joe Hart. And the manager at the time was Sven-Göran Eriksson. And Sven said there was nothing between the two, but he went with Hart because Hart was English. So Schmeichel has been in a situation before where he's felt that he's a number one goalkeeper, but he was there as number two and he didn't enjoy it. And obviously from Manchester City, he got loaned out to places like Darlington and Bury and Falkirk and Cardiff, and a short spell at Coventry as well. And then he had to go all the way to Notts County before climbing back up to Leeds and to Leicester. And at his age, I don't see him finishing full circle and being a number two goalkeeper unless somebody tells him when he joins it's a straight fight for number one or he's going to get game time. I don't believe that's in his personality. I think he'd rather just do another season at Leicester and then retire, and as a consequence go out on his peak. So I don't believe there's much substance, not because Newcastle don't rate Schmeichel. He'd be a great number two and he'd certainly provide competition for number one. Some would even say that he's better than what Newcastle have got at the moment, but it's just that age thing. You know, if you're bringing in a 36-year-old as your number one goalkeeper, or using him as your number one goalkeeper, or weighting the game time equally in different competitions, then that's not within that strategy of the future. And I know goalkeepers in their early 30s are still considered quite young, but I just don't see Newcastle wanting to bring in somebody that turns 36 this year. And I also think it would be a very, very hard sell to persuade Kasper to make that move.
Keeping on goalkeepers, Benji says, anyone else heard of the rumours about Jan Sommer, the Switzerland goalkeeper? What do you think of him, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, what we were just talking about a moment ago, that Dan Ashworth has very much allocated other names and Sommer is one of them. And I think right now, if it's to be a prediction between Sommer and Henderson, it's going to be Sommer that Newcastle turn their attention to. And that is simply because Dan Ashworth prefers the option of Sommer to Henderson. even though Henderson has got more longevity. 33 from Summer's perspective, still pretty young for a goalkeeper. He's won, I think, 74 caps for Switzerland. He's been at Borussia Mönchengladbach since 2014. He's had experience playing over 100 games for Basel as well. And what you get with Sommer is a very good distributor of the ball, a decent shot stopper, can at times be a little bit guilty of being hesitant on his line. So, you know, in the Premier League in particular, I was reading a statistical article that said that a much higher proportion of corners are whipped into that sort of danger area of indecisiveness for a goalkeeper, whereas in La Liga, there wasn't much between the leagues, but in La Liga and in Ligue 1 in particular, and then the Bundesliga, it said that you have a higher volume of short corners, of corners to the near post, of corners right underneath the goalkeeper. In the Premier League, you get a lot more intended to clear the first man and get looped into that area of what it called indecisiveness. And what that means is that if you get it right, then you either get your head on it more often, or if you get it wrong, the goalkeeper gets a commanding take. And if you get it exactly where it's meant to be, then you cause havoc, because the goalkeeper won't know whether to come off his line or not, and whether you win the ball or not, you've got a chance of winning the second ball. And Sommer was listed within that article as one of the goalkeepers that often is unsure, comparative to namesakes of his age in Europe, of whether or not to come off that line or not. And sometimes he makes poor decisions. So that's maybe the one area that wouldn't suit him in the Premier League, because there's a higher volume of balls in to an indecisive area, and he can be a bit indecisive. But there's no denying that he's got good distribution. He's got a safe pair of hands. He's a good shot stopper, particularly down low. He's very good at getting down quickly and making himself look big in the goal. And even though he might be indecisive when aerial balls are high, he's very decisive on one-on-ones. So I think he'd be a good signing for Newcastle. And like I say, watch this space, because he's certainly somebody who is on Newcastle's radar.
Okay, Victor Osimhen, is that another one that you've heard of? Dan Brown's asking, any rumours about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that he will be a great signing for anybody in the Premier League or across Europe that gets him. Osimhen is a player that I've watched a lot of at both club level for Napoli and Nigeria as well. And he was very good for Lille as well. The challenge with Osimhen is that Napoli really don't want to sell. And why would they? He scored 18 goals in all competitions, 14 of them coming in Serie A. He got into double figures the season before. And I think that every season of his senior career anyway, so I'm excluding Wolfsburg from this, he's got into double figures in the league. And that includes with Charleroi when he was on loan in the Belgian Pro League. So you're getting a goal scorer and you're getting a very versatile talent. He's 6'1". He puts himself around. He's got a good leap on him. He's got control on the ball. He's unselfish at times, sometimes to the detriment. And he's a born finisher. And I'm surprised that we're not seeing more Big Six interest if we're specifically talking about the Premier League. It's been intimated to me by Napoli that if Arsenal don't get Gabriel Jesus, that Osimhen will be their backup name. And Newcastle and Tottenham are the other two Premier League clubs that I've heard are interested. And Newcastle have only made an inquiry to the agent to date. They've not gone to Napoli. They've not started any kind of advanced talks. But this may progress now. Dan Ashworth is fully in situ. And I think that even though everyone wants Ekitike, and that clearly is Newcastle's number one, I think that Osimhen makes a massive amount of sense because of his age, because of his talent. And then the key question really is, what do you have to pay Napoli in order to make this transfer a reality? And that's where the negotiations might stumble, because you probably market value, I would say, only my opinion, I've not looked up what the sort of statistics say, I would say he's a 45 to 50 million pound player as a minimum. And that probably means that Napoli are wanting 60, 65, even 70 if they're even to consider selling. And that's when I think Newcastle United would walk away from the deal. So if they can negotiate and find a fee that they think is value and they don't get Ekitike, then they should proceed because he's a phenomenal talent. But the reluctance of Napoli to sell this window and the high transfer fee might unfortunately make this one a non-starter, not just for Newcastle, but for all of the Premier League clubs interested.
Yeah, time's up, but I do want to fire in these couple of questions. Do we have an interest in Ibrahim Senghor from PSV, says Football Style? He's also asking what the situation is with Botman and Hugo Ekitike, which we did cover at the start of the programme. Interesting side note, which I forgot to mention, was that Dan Ashworth was actually watching Botman yesterday. So, clearly still, focusing on Botman. Football Style. But yeah, I will ask you another question. Ibrahim Senghor, is that a name that's been linked with Newcastle?
Yeah, and Newcastle again are one of the clubs vaguely looking at him. And I know that he's a little bit different to what Newcastle have got, a more specialist defensive midfielder, although you can argue that for Joe Linton as well. But Joe Linton and Bruno have sort of proven themselves to be able to get a bit more box-to-box. Sangare is closer to Joe Linton, I suppose, but even comparative to Joe Linton, I found him even more disciplined and defence-minded and a huge talent. And there's a lot of interest. 24-year-old Ivorian international. So the value is that, unlike others in the market, Sangare has a release clause, I believe, of only 30 million, which makes him a complete bargain. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if Manchester United go in for Sangare at some point. And there's a lot of Manchester United fans that I know who are out there that really want that deal to happen. And the growing links between Manchester United and Sangare are probably snowballing because of the departure of Matic. And I think Manchester United is probably a more likely club than Newcastle United at the moment. And Liverpool have even been interested in Sangare as well. So I think what puts Newcastle off, even though the value is good, is defensive midfielder a huge priority right now if you're only going to get 3 or 4 signings this summer? And I would say the answer is no. But make no mistake, Sangare has historically been a player prior to Ashworth arriving that Newcastle have looked at. And then, as you say, we covered Ekitike and Botman. All I'd add about Botman, if people were late to the broadcast, basically, Ekitike's injury, not a problem. Newcastle continue to negotiate. The challenge is persuading the player to come, i.e. agreeing personal terms. I'm not saying he's not interested in Newcastle as a place or a city as a club, but there's still some negotiation work to do. Botman obviously far more advanced and still looks like being a straight choice between Milan and Newcastle. And he'll wait for that Milan offer if they can strike a deal with Lille to materialise, and then he'll make his decision. But he's going to have 2 good options, and Newcastle, if you talk to Newcastle, are confident on that deal. My only last thing to say on Botman, not to pour cold water over the player by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes when a transfer goes on for so long, the player can almost gain cult status because everyone's like, oh, Botman, everyone said he's good. We've been chasing him. He's got a relatively high price tag, etc., etc. And you finally get him, or just before you get him, everyone's really excited. And all I'd say is that if Newcastle missed out on Botman, I don't think it would be a disaster as long as they find another defender in that position. And the reason for that is because I asked a couple of scouts at Big Six clubs who had scouted Botman, and each of them independently at 3 different clubs, I won't name the clubs because these were all off record, each of them had said that Botman is overrated. So I think that's interesting because usually a scout, if they've got any vague interest, will sort of speak quite highly of a player. And there's no reason for a scout to speak negatively of their opinion of a player in the context of trying to derail another club or anything along those lines. But I just thought that was interesting, that the areas of his game that were flagged as being overrated or in need of improvement were quite significant by 3 different scouts. So even though when you watch the videos of Botman and everyone gets really excited about that deal and says exactly what Newcastle need, huge talent, huge potential and so on, there's quite a few scouts out there that think there's better options in that position. So that might be the silver lining from Newcastle's perspective. If they get him, an opportunity to prove those scouts wrong. If they don't get him, perhaps they'll end up thinking of it in hindsight, the fans and the club, as a blessing in disguise.
Barry just saying, if that's the case, why aren't we looking at Tarkowski? Got to be honest, mate, too similar to Dan Burn. I genuinely wouldn't go anywhere near him. Andy, thanks for that shout out as well. He says Dan Ashworth's son was in the under-21 squad for Wales yesterday, so he might have only been there to watch him. Good shout, possible. You never know. One would imagine he would have had his eye on Botman as well, though. As Newcastle would probably want him to take a look at him. There was one other question. That's the last one. Paqueta, yeah, it's a name that's been bandied around with Newcastle. Obviously, the friendship that he has with Bruno as well. Any updates on that, Ben, before we finish?
Yeah, it's another good question, Lucas. Paqueta, and as you say, good friendship with Bruno, and therefore a very logical move. Players don't only join because they have friends in another team, but what it does do is mean that if he's interested in a Premier League move, and Newcastle specifically, getting him up to Newcastle when he sees the connection that Bruno has with the fan base will be an absolute given. And he's coming off a great season with Lyon in 2021-22, where he scored 11 goals in all competitions. I think 9 of them came in Ligue 1, which is pretty much the same tally as the season before. So real consistency. And the big sort of difference between Lyon and his spell at AC Milan is that he's just found a way now to score goals consistently. Whereas I think even though he was deployed a bit differently at Milan, he played something like 44, 45 games and only scored once. And he's already scored 20 plus goals for Lyon in all competitions. The challenge for Newcastle is just competition from Spurs. So the interest is very firm from Newcastle, from what I gather. But Tottenham are in that position where Daniel Levy has not only put more money into their transfer budget for this summer, but they've got that lure of Champions League football. And I think that Tottenham, even with Perisic arriving, are ramping up their efforts as well for Paqueta. So Lyon sort of are probably going to be forced to sell. And it's one to watch. It's a good test of Dan Ashworth and him and Newcastle's ambition, especially when up against a club like Spurs, who have got Champions League football to offer. And those are the true front runners at the moment. But again, there's nothing advanced or agreed, as I understand it anyway, with either the player, and this is speaking for Spurs and Newcastle, the player and both clubs, or Lyon and either club. So if that transfers to happen, I think it's going to drag on a little bit this window, but there is truth from what I understand in Newcastle's interest for sure.
Millwall Martin, just Google Elliot Anderson and his spell at Bristol. Read what Joey Barton says about him, mate. He's a great player, and if he goes on loan to Millwall, you have got a hell of a player next season, mate. We just hope that he develops and we can get the best out of him. But got no problem with him going to Millwall if it's going to help his development, mate. But he is a cracking player. Thanks everybody, and thanks to you, Ben, obviously for coming on. From my perspective, it's always great to chat to you anyway. But good to get a bit of insight into transfers, and look forward to getting you back on very soon. Anything that you want to promote, mate, before we finish?
No, not really. Just to wish the fans a good window and a healthy and happy summer before we do it all over again soon. And when we know the dates between Leicester and Newcastle, I'll be able to tell you when I'm coming up again. I don't think I'll be wearing another Newcastle shirt this time. I might bring up the one that I've got, though, from last season. But yes, if anyone wants to follow me and they're not at Jacobs Ben, and also feel free to follow the professional handles. So I'm at CBS full time now. At CBS Sports Golasso is the social media handles. And we are on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok.
Top man, great stuff, Ben, as always. Give him a follow on Twitter. Always good insight into anything and everything. His insight into the whole Chelsea situation was rather fascinating as well. So it's not just Newcastle content. Please give Ben a follow, and we will get him back on the show very soon. Take care, Ben. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, mate.
Cheers.